Hello, you wonderful people. So some new news has come out that Ryan Reynolds has released at least some updates about the Deadpool 3 situation. He's announced that it is a Marvel Studios production. From what I've seen online at the time of recording this, that's all that's really out there. But that itself speaks a lot of volumes, because obviously the whole question going forward is like, okay, so what are they going to do with Deadpool? Obviously, along with X-Men, Deadpool kind of falls under, you know, that being now under the Marvel umbrella and everything. So the big question obviously going forward is going to be like, okay, so how are they going to handle the Deadpool thing? Most people, and I think Ryan Reynolds kind of agrees, wants Deadpool to be able to be the R-rated movie that it's been before now. It's had great success as an R-rated movie, and the fact of the matter is kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of situation. But also it's just because it allows the character to kind of flex and kind of do what it wants with itself. But now it being labeled as a Marvel production, that kind of puts it in perspective of like, okay, so it being Marvel Studios specifically, not just Marvel, but Marvel Studios kind of makes it go, okay, so that means it's definitely going to be an MCU film. You'd assume so, considering the fact this is Marvel Studios, but maybe that's something they're going to be looking forward as a technicality going forward. We'll kind of ultimately see, but that makes it go like, okay, so that means it's definitely going to be a PG-13 movie, because everything in the MCU is PG-13. So it's like, okay, so what does that mean for Deadpool, you know? So that, I think that's probably going to be kind of a thing within itself of like, okay, so, you know, Disney is obviously PG-13 is as high as they're going to go. I don't believe they will ever go higher than that. Like, obviously you have your like outside spectrums of things like your Netflix Marvel stuff, just because that wasn't like mainline MCU stuff. That was, for one, that was TV, but even TV's kind of moving away, because now all that's going to be part of the MCU too. So stuff like the Netflix stuff, or even something like Legion, probably less likely to get something like that. I mean, like, the concept of like something like crazy and wild like Legion is not out of the picture, but you know, them being able to kind of flex and kind of go as far as they want to, much like the Netflix shows being able to kind of go as far as they want to, tackle certain subjects that they probably wouldn't be able to tackle in a PG-13 movie. You know, it just, you kind of box yourself in a little bit, is kind of, you know, the situation. And so I think that's a concern everyone kind of has about, you know, Deadpool, but not just Deadpool, just the MCU in general, that the fact is you'll never get, you know, a Logan, for example. Obviously, like I said, this is just me retreading water. This has already been a concern since the whole, you know, Fox and Disney merger of like, yeah, it's cool that, you know, X-Men and Fantastic Four and Deadpool all get to be part of, you know, the MCU, but it comes to that, you know, thing of like, obviously people have their worries of like, well, that means when things become part of the MCU, they kind of fall into that MCU format. But then again, it's like when you look at certain movies in the MCU, people always say that like, the fact is, yeah, certain things kind of feel samey for some people. I don't feel like that at all. I feel like the MCU is able to very distinguish very much between the different movies, and a very different, because the movies fit the heroes and they all kind of have their different feeling vibes within the MCU, but not everyone feels like that, because for some people there are more movies that kind of have a tendency to stand out more. With, like, a great example would be like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. They kind of stand out very much so amongst, you know, just tone wise and just the nature of those movies in general. But you know, so I don't worry about that too much. I still feel like every movie's still going to have its own flair, but obviously that's a whole conversation. That's a much larger and longer conversation and debate, you know, you can have. This whole situation does kind of get me thinking, like, because I'm not too worried about it, because, like, if Deadpool ends up being PG-13, I'm not too stressed about it, because I know Deadpool could work as a PG-13 movie. But it's that thing of being able to have the freedom to kind of go for that full R. That's something a lot of people would want, but obviously Disney obviously would have their reservations, because it's like, that's not what we're kind of going for. So I know that's going to turn into some issues going forward. So I'm curious to see how they handle it. Obviously, you know, conversations, I've talked about this before, but obviously, like, it's never been my idea, but it's something I've heard people talk about is, all right, give Deadpool his own movies, make them R-rated, but then when it comes to like Deadpool in the MCU, make him PG-13. It's kind of always been kind of like the solution a lot of people's kind of come up with. But then it's like, well, how do you handle that? Like making Deadpool R-rated but kind of its own thing. It's like, well, have Disney kind of put it under the Fox banner under, you know, Disney, so that way you can do the R-rated without, in a way, compromising the family-friendly image that is, you know, the Disney and the MCU, you know. But then it turns to that thing, well, if you do make Deadpool PG-13, it's like you could have fun with that, but then some people worry of like, well, if that gag gets older, of like, oh, he can't cut up and act the way he wants to, because it's like, all right, I'm in an MCU movie, so you could play with that. But obviously, like, for some people it's like, oh, that get old. I think people kind of underestimate how far you can go with a PG-13 Deadpool. I think people underestimate how that could work. But once again, it's like, I get it. You want to flex that R. You know, it's had, like I said, had success in the R. Why kind of change that? You know, it's a, once again, very long conversation in within itself. It does also beg the question too, like, well, what does that mean about the X-Men situation? Because obviously we're not at a point where it's like, oh, Deadpool's coming out next year. We've got all of Phase 4. If Phase 5 is the one that still hasn't 100% worked out, I mean, at least in a sense that we don't know what it is. To be fair, like, you know, it all depends on how Phase 4 plays out. I'm sure that's going to affect a lot of, like, oh, what they do with Phase 5. I'm sure they already kind of have their ideas of, like, Blade and stuff like that. But still, like, obviously that's kind of all we really know. There's also Black Panther 2, Captain Marvel 2, so Deadpool might fall in that lane, you know, at some point. But obviously it's also like, well, listen, you're setting up Deadpool, what does that mean for the rest of the X-Men? Because you also have to think about Deadpool's a part of the original X-Men, you know, Fox X-Men continuity, but it's Deadpool. You can play with that. It's a fourth wall breaking character. I'm like, oh, wow. Oh man, where's X? Oh, what? Oh, Wolverine's not played by Hugh Jackman anymore? What? This is crazy. What? You look so, you know, they can play with that. They've literally made jokes about it of, you know, even in the Fox movies of like, oh, you're talking about Professor X, which one, Patrick Stewart or James McAvoy? They literally made that joke. So it could be something they kind of play with like that as well. But, so that's probably a thing of like, no, ignore all that continuity. It's like, oh, but what about, no, ignore that continuity. I'm telling you, ignore it. It doesn't matter anymore. They could heavily like play into it. But circling back to the point I really meant to kind of really bring up was the fact is, if we are potentially already working on Deadpool 3 now, without the rest of the X-Men already being established, it means like, well, what does that mean for them? Does that mean, I mean, I'm sure they already have some idea of what they're going to do with the X-Men, but the fact is it hasn't happened cinematically yet. So to be doing Deadpool 3 at this point, especially considering Deadpool is a mutant and you haven't really established mutants, is he going to be your jumping off point for the mutants? Then, because it's that whole, well, once again, it's the whole fourth wall breaking thing, because like I said, you don't have to worry about carrying over that continuity, but still it kind of exists. I mean, Deadpool's in its own lane, so I guess because of that, you don't have to worry about that, but it's just going to be the interesting thing. It's much like the Spider-Man thing. I've talked about this before, you know, when Spider-Man was being brought to the MCU, it's like, well, you didn't bring the rest of the mutants with him, and Spider-Man technically counts as a mutant, so it's like, what were you going to label him as? They've avoided that whole conversation. He's like, oh, he's enhanced, or they just really just haven't even bothered referring to him as anything. So I'm wondering, they're going to, once they introduce the X-Men, retroactively be like, oh yeah, Deadpool's an X-Men, because he's a mutant, and Spider-Man, you know, Peter is a mutant, you know. I mean, hell, even that turns to the whole conversation. That depends on how the whole Sony situation works out. Currently with, you know, that it's a whole complicated thing when you actually kind of think about that. But I'm curious. I mean, once again, it's Phase 5, but I mean, to be fair, that is a couple years out. I wouldn't think they'd do X-Men this soon if they did do Deadpool, so that's why I'm kind of wondering about all that. Ultimately, we just, like I said, have to wait and see, but that's just where my mind is about all of this. And that in itself leads me to my question. How do you guys feel about this whole situation? I know a lot of people are excited to see Deadpool 3 finally being made, but at the same time, it's a whole complicated thing of, well, it's that whole PG-13 R-rated problem, you know, that's probably the biggest issue. I'd love to get to know your thoughts in the comments about that. Are you kind of bummed if, you know, Deadpool isn't R-rated, or are you one of those people kind of like me that's like, you're fine with a PG-13 as long as Deadpool's in there, that's all you're happy about? Let me know your thoughts. I'm really interested to hear, you know, people's perspectives on the situation. But really, that's what I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.